Good evening. It is now 7 p.m. Tuesday, February 7th, 2017. I call the Board of Selectmen's meeting to order. You all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Public forum is limited to 5 minutes per topic. Discussions or comments about town employees or agencies member shall be avoided so as not to violate anybody's rights. Is there anyone here for public forum? Seeing none, we'll go into the minutes. And I have a motion on the minutes.
Mr. Vice Chairman, I move to accept the Board of Selectmen's minutes from January 17th, 2017.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay, that will go past. It is 3-0.
Aye.
Aye.
Right. Vote. Great. We're all set. All right. Agenda, discussion of the marijuana grow facility. Jim, can you?
Thank you, Mr.
walk us
Chairman.
through this?
You know, we've been at this for quite a while with this company, and they initially dealt with Jennifer Hager in the planning department. After Jennifer kind of finalized those discussions, they decided to contact me. I informally polled the board, and they didn't. My opinion is the board didn't seem overly excited about this, but was willing to listen to a presentation. So I contacted our contact, who's Mike Dreher, who is the director of cultivation. He's on the board of directors for this company called MD Holistics. They are proposing a medical marijuana grow facility on 12 John Road, right on the behind the former Honeydew Donuts. Thanks, Deb. You know, I was hoping they were going to be here tonight. I don't see them in the audience, so unfortunately, we won't be able to hear from them unless they show up in the next minute or two. I would have been interested to hear more about their plans for this facility. It's a small facility. It's about 3,000 square feet. It's not a big facility. The host fee is generally 3% of the gross profits of the facility. Being such a small facility, though, it probably wouldn't generate much revenue as far as the gross profits. So, in addition, the planning board is also considering an article at Maytown meeting to issue a further moratorium on recreational marijuana, and they're also going to deal with the medical marijuana. They are considering limiting where medical marijuana grow facilities can be located. They are planning on restricting those grow facilities to office light industrial districts, OLI districts. There are a few OLI districts in the town. This proposed site on John Road is not. That's an industrial district. So, you know, in 3 months, town meeting will consider this issue. And if they decide these facilities can be in the OLI district, then this facility wouldn't be wouldn't meet that criteria. Obviously, if the Board of Selectmen issues a letter of non-opposition or a letter of approval prior to Maytown meeting, then it would be grandfathered in and the facility would be able to operate or at least proceed with the licenses. So we'll have to see. Are you with?
MD Holistics.
So are you Michael?
Yes.
All right.
Sorry I'm late.
All right. Well, I did enough delaying. I tried to talk for quite a bit. So anyway, we have Michael Dreher, who, as I mentioned, is the Director of Cultivation on the Board of Directors for MD Holistics. If you want to come up, Michael,
Be happy to.
and present to the board, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Sorry again for being late.
All right, no problem. Weather's tough out there, I imagine.
No excuse.
Mike, could you state your name?
Absolutely.
And address for the
Really,
minutes?
yeah, you got it. Michael Dreher, Director of Cultivation for MD Holistics, and thank you for your time. Thank you for having me here today. And again, I just apologize for taking your time. I know.
Weather's tough, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. With whatever James has said, I'll just kind of fill in my version of it, why we're here. I guess he's given you some of the information. What brought me to this board was a piece of property that I looked at 12 John Road in Sutton, and started kind of navigating the town's process with Jen Hager to figure out what it would require in order to open a registered marijuana dispensary in Sutton. My company is a local group of people. We're all Massachusetts natives from Newton, Wellesley, and Sharon, the like. So, to say we're from this area exactly would not be entirely correct, but we like to say that we're local versus a group from California or Colorado or something like that. So we want to make sure we communicate that's an important thing to us, that we have the right representation locally for this new business that's starting to open up here in the state. And we certainly understand the character associated with Massachusetts, so we feel like that's always a benefit for us. I'll give a little bit of background about myself and speak a little bit about our company and our proposed business. And then I'd like to just allow you guys to ask questions. I think that's kind of the most productive way to have the meeting. So as for myself, I studied economics in college. I've always been an avid horticulturist and grown food crops for community farms, ran local farmers markets. I studied with great master gardeners and marine biologists who discovered the plastic contamination gyres in the major oceans, and that's part of my background. So I've been able to apply a lot of that to cannabis cultivation and have had great success. I've run or oversaw businesses in California and in Nevada in the medical marijuana regulated markets that they have there. So I have a pretty good understanding of how these things work, and been part of some failures and part of some successes, and certainly the failures have given me a good amount of education in how to avoid making those kinds of mistakes. So with that being said, a small business is our preferred kind of model rather than these large businesses. And I know, the American dream is to capture big business and make a lot of money, but this is an industry where I think that there's the right amount of revenue and the right size business that is appropriate, so that you mitigate a lot of issues that come with trying to have a brand new industry that still teeters on these federal regulations as far as its legality. It's good to have it small as kind of a way to test the waters and figure out how to get involved with it. Our company, my partner, childhood friend, is the CEO of the company. His name's Joseph Mullen. He couldn't be here with me tonight. He's got a 3-year-old daughter who must have partied too hard during the Super Bowl. And I apologize for using humor, but congratulations with all that. So he owns the company. His family has put the money up to help us get involved in this, and it's all, our board of directors is a bunch of local folks with disciplines in non-for-profit business and hospitality and security software and the like, and group of folks from the area, all from Massachusetts, but family owned. So again, the emphasis is really just to say we're not a large business group. We're not a big corporation. None of these folks have any extracurricular marijuana business ties. This is kind of a project that we've put together because we felt like we would have the right model to fit some of these towns, and we hope that maybe we can move forward as a better option than some of the other folks that have suggested it in the region and things like that because of our understanding of the character of the Commonwealth and our ideas of having a small business. So one of the things that we've talked about a little bit, I believe James and I, if not, have submitted some paperwork for it, would be our willingness to agree to some sort of host community agreement with the town to help the town capture some benefit financially to use at their leisure and their pleasure for allowing our business to operate. And obviously security is always a big concern with these things from a number of vantage points. You know, you're talking about the intangibles and the actual, you know, nuts and bolts of securing these businesses. So when we talk about the site that we had looked at 12 John Road, it's about 3,000 square feet. It's a basic empty warehouse shell in a bigger building that houses other warehouse shells similar. And we have very robust regulations with the state that we have to uphold, and we'll be audited regularly. So we have to maintain a certain level of secure practice in order to be able to operate from a state level. All of our directors and board members are all vetted through the state, so there's a number of layers of security that's mandatory that we have to put in place. At this time, we have a provisional certificate from the state. It was to operate in Canton. We were given that letter of non-opposition in Canton in April of 2016. And just in the process, it became something where we found ourselves in a long, drawn-out process in Canton. So, you know, for our sake, our goal is to open a business and run it. You know, we're not looking actually to do an adult use business either, a recreational marijuana business. This would be a medical marijuana facility only. So we're more than happy to concede, you know, that fundamental thing that's kind of floating around now with all this new voting. I know, you know, timelines for all that to come around are probably 18 months from now, where, you know, towns can impose moratoriums on the recreational use and develop bylaws and things like that to, you know, make sure they can handle that up-and-coming business the way that works best for the town. So I, you know, just want to make sure that's clear, that that's our initial goal. And I understand from the zoning regulations, there's not a retail use allowed in the industrial zone. So this would be for cultivation only, not exactly a dispensary. It was our hope that we could maybe find some real estate in town and maybe have some sort of retail use, not necessarily a brick and mortar, but perhaps delivery service of sorts, which is allowed by the state. And again, I don't ever want delivery service to mean something that it's not. It's still very secure. Everything's very controlled. Inventory control and non-diversion is a major priority. And so there's a lot of checks and balances and triple time stamps with respect to how product moves at all times with a marijuana facility. So again, that's kind of the base proposal is I'll kind of summarize. We're hoping to get a letter from the town. A letter of non-opposition is pretty standard. Support, you know, always, unless the town really wants to support it, a letter of non-opposition is usually the preferred nomenclature. And that would help us move forward with the state process. It certainly wouldn't bind the town to anything. There would still be, I'm sure, a special permit process with respect to the town. So if the Board of Selectmen were to give us a letter of non-opposition, it would just help us move one step forward. So I just say that to clarify so that it doesn't seem like if this board makes a decision, it's the stamp on an approval for us to open a business. It simply says we're MD Holistics as a nonprofit has been approved at this address pursuant to a special permit, which again is a very lengthy process, and we, you know, would have to work out some negotiations relating to the host community agreement and things like that for all that stuff to kind of line up and happen. So I think I've said about enough. And again, I apologize for being late, and I had to run up the stairs and find everything and dodge the ice, but I'm here, and I apologize we couldn't make it out for the last scheduled meeting. Anyway, I'll open it up to any and all questions. I'd be happy to answer and address anything.
Right, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I appreciate
What we
it.
do is each selectman gets a time to listen
Mm-hmm.
and talk, as we've all heard, give their questions. So first off, we'll start off with Selectman Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael, again, thank you for being here tonight. You may be aware that this is the first time a facility like this has come before us, so I suspect you're going to field a number of questions tonight. So,
Surely, I'd be happy to.
So I just want to start off with, I guess, a few things. You touched on some of these things, but I want to get into a little bit more detail. So you were issued a provisional permit by the state, something like that?
Yeah, what the state refers to as a, what is it?
Provisional certificate of registration. I just
Yeah,
found it.
provisional certificate of registration. I apologize. I believe I submitted it to Debbie.
Yep, we have it
Okay,
here.
so that, we like to show that because it shows that we've been vetted by the state.
Yeah, that's the actual point I wanted to get to. So
Sure.
the state has actually done a lot of background checks and
Absolutely.
things like
Yeah,
things of
so
that
I'll
nature, too.
kind of just give you some background on what the application process requires. It's a 3-phase application process. The first phase is to establish the legitimacy of a non-for-profit entity. So that's where all the background checks come into place. So we have, I believe, 9 board of directors, if I'm not mistaken, and we have 3 officers, CEO, CFO, COO. So Joseph Mullen's the CEO, Drew Mullen, his brother, is the COO, and Jason Mullen, the oldest brother, is the CFO. I serve as the Director of Cultivation. Nicholas Jansen, who was a gentleman I worked with in Nevada quite extensively, is our Director of Security. He's a veteran in the Iraq War. And beyond that, we have Board of Directors, which comprise many disciplines. So all those individuals had to go through state background checks. The gist of the background check is they're looking for any felonious activity or anything that would make them not want to have those folks involved in their Department of Public Health's medical marijuana program. And you're also looking for where money is coming from and things like that. The Cole memo is a document that was prescribed by the federal government to kind of outline how states should move forward with marijuana businesses, and the state uses that as a basis and then provides that same kind of guidance down through the townships and the like.
And you had to post some kind of bond, is that correct?
We have a number of fees through the application process. So I thank you for bringing me back on track. So the first part of the phase is to establish a non-for-profit entity. The second phase is what's called the management and operations profile. So that's where you actually detail and describe how you will operate the business, and more specifically how you will be in compliant while you operate the business. So that's where, folks like myself and Nicholas, our Director of Security, and certain elements of management are vetted for our qualifications. So like I said, I, in 2010, worked in Long Beach, California, where they have a very notorious regulated attempt in California as a city through a lottery system, and everybody put up fees to apply. And after 2 years of the applicants being approved, somebody challenged the ability for a city to regulate something that's federally illegal, so the whole thing kind of came apart and got held up, and moratoriums were put in place on that. Anyway, I'm mentioning that as far as how the vetting process works to make sure that the right people with actual qualifications can participate in this, the goal being to make medicine and provide medicine or remedies for folks in that capacity. So you wouldn't want somebody to say, I grow tulips for the last 20 years, I'll take my shot at marijuana, is the gist, and the state kind of performing its due diligence. So the third part of the application is the siting profile, and that's where you are showing an interest in a property, and part of that is to also have some preliminary approval from the town, which is this letter of non-opposition, or just some town letter that says, yes, initially we give them permission at such and such a site to move forward with the special permit process. But then, you're having to have an inspection from the state, and you're having to meet all the normal building codes that you would have to on a local level as well. So at this time, we would be kind of in the siting profile phase where we would simply amend our address that initially was an address in Canton. We would amend it to, to show Sutton as an address in that event if we were to open up a business here.
Okay. So, I get the reason for my question, I guess, is just to confirm that really the state has done a thorough background check on the individuals that are involved, the operating
Procedures.
capabilities that you have, and really even a financial check to ensure that you have
Absolutely.
enough
Yep.
financial background to,
Yep.
to be able to.
To make sure we have enough capital to
Yep.
move forward with it without it being something that would cause detriment to the end goal, which again is just to provide a business to satisfy the voters, need for marijuana to be available in a medical
Yep.
capacity. So the state has done a very, very rigorous background check, and we've been working on this since July of 2015.
So, if I can switch to sort of the local element of this now, I did just a brief internet search on the Mullins, and they all appear to be gainfully employed in areas other than this.
Security software,
Yep.
RSA company is where Drew and Joseph both work, and I'm just making sure these are all off. And Jason similarly in Stratham, New Hampshire.
So I guess the concern that I had is amongst the principals that are listed, and perhaps this is you, who's going to be on site running the facility?
Great question. It would be me at the onset. We would hire locally and train staff locally. I'd say eventually, I'm sure Joe would, if the business was lucrative, would love to come and take a position and a role in the business without throwing him under the bus for RSA. But I ultimately serve as the manager for the business, director of cultivation. I'm very hands-on with that approach. So.
And you had a director of security, I think, too. I mean, is that person
And the director
sort
of security, I'm not sure how day to day the director of security would be involved, but the director of security would be part of our company vetting process as we hire security personnel and things like that, and to ensure that that all our compliance requirements are being satisfied.
Okay.
So again, that's probably something we would look to hire local groups and.
Okay. I got maybe one more generic set of questions, and I'll move my time over. So, about the facility itself, I'm doing some reading about marijuana grow facilities, and then sort of the needs or the requirements of the facility itself to be able to support that. And I'm not specifically familiar with 12 John Road. You said that's in a warehouse that's sort of housed inside of other. In a larger structure.
Right.
So I guess I'm concerned about the impact of the business itself. I understand that there's, significant HVAC requirements, and certain elements of the process can create odors and things like that. And how do you control that
Sure.
so that you don't have an
No,
impact on your?
it's a great
on
question.
your
I can
neighbors?
kind of give you a picture, and then I can address that more specifically of what our grow facility would look like. It's 3,000 square feet, which by most standards is very small. Because there's not a dispensary attached to it or anything like that, the process is you show up to the facility as an employee or manager or what have you. The first doors are all covered with cameras, and you have secure personnel only allowed to access. You're even in a secure lobby, in essence, when you go through the first door, and then you have another layer of security that you go through. And once you're through that portion, then there's secured containers that we use, whether we purchase them prefabricated or we build them ourselves. They're analogous to shipping containers that have been retrofitted to secure whatever's going on inside there, whether you're drying the herbs in their final state or they're they're growing in their vegetative state or something to that effect, or in their flowering state. the whole building, and we did satisfy an LOI with the owners of 12 John Road, and part of that letter of intent requires that we have some penalties if we can't control the odors. And again, the state has rigorous regulations for that as well. So with the HVAC requirements, there are also modern technologies to help mitigate odor, which is typically the nuisance that you would run into. So the lighting fixtures are ducted and they go through filters before they exhaust the air through the roof or something to that effect. But as it relates to our tenants and making sure that we're good neighbors, there's countless amount of cameras that need to be placed in these things for state requirements to make sure every inch of the facility is seen. And again, it all comes down to non-diversion of product. We don't want this stuff to go where it's not supposed to go. That's really the backbone of it all. And beyond that, we want it to be safe for people to use. So there's also a level of testing through state testing companies that we have to submit our final product through to make sure they're healthy for consumption in any capacity. So the exterior would have cameras that would see beyond just our building. So I'm speaking, you go through a door that has cameras on it, but we also have a requirement to secure the entire building, at least with initial video surveillance and things like that. And we would probably have to fortify our 3,000 square foot space beyond what's normal. So for instance, if you have normal drywall segregations in the warehouse facility, we would probably have to add something like a chain link fence that goes up 18 or 24 feet, whatever the height of the building is, or something like that. It wouldn't necessarily have to be cinder block all the way up, but it's something to create time for emergency response in the event of something, and just to do our best to satisfy and be in compliance with whatever the state's requirements are for securing the product. Does that answer your question a little bit? I'm happy to be more detailed.
No, I think it does. Again, I was really sort of specifically concerned about the impact on the neighbors. But I mean, you touch on the things that I read about were, special high heat lighting, CO2 enrichment.
That's a great one. We actually use fresh air rather than CO2 enrichment because we feel like CO2 enrichment causes more issues for personnel. You can't have a room that has 1,300, 1,500 parts per million of CO2 and have people going in and out. Yeah. And so, I'm a organic farmer by trade, so I'm very convinced there's enough CO2 in the ambient atmosphere to grow plants. I think that's fine. So we impart HVAC mechanisms that draw in fresh air, and that way personnel can always interact in the space with that safely. The high heat lighting, high intense discharge lighting fixtures, similar to a street lamp or something like that. Not necessarily a industrial grade, but certainly when they're used in abundance, you have to have certain protocols and precautionary measures for that. But other than that, there's 50% of the facility uses simple T5 lighting for a certain stage of plant growth. So it's really when you induce the flowering, which is how we make the product, where we derive the essential oil that has become valuable to society, that requires a light that almost mimics sunlight or something to that effect. So the HVAC requirements for those are a little bit more substantial, but nothing, overly industrial in the manufacturing process or anything like that. And as far as if we were to operate it as a cultivation facility, again, we wouldn't have people going there to purchase anything. So it would limit the level of predation that may happen on the facility because there's not hordes of cash there or anything like that.
But you would plan to do whatever kind of processing that was necessary on site, is that correct?
Yes, the cultivation, just the raw flower form, and then potentially concentrates. I don't think we would put a kitchen in there or make edibles or anything like that. And when I say concentrate, I know that word can kind of be sensitive. There's a lot of concern around butane extraction protocols and CO2 extraction protocols. And again, similar to the fresh air, I like to use a hot press that's really equivalent to like a panini press and really about the same size. And the other method is an ice water extract process, which is, as industrial as using a residential washing machine. So you're using cold water with ice in it to help agitate the plant tissue to remove and make brittle the resins and the essential oils that we derive from the plant. And you use a catchment and filter through, and then you have a concentrated form of the essential oil, which, folks seem to do well with a variety of maladies when they have this concentrated form. There's also, always the other side of it where there's plenty of room for abuse with it, but, that would be something that we would want to also utilize in the facility, would be the processing end of it.
But you wouldn't plan any open butane systems?
No, I don't believe so. I think also it would be something we would, I should step back and just say a lot of this process for us, and we feel happy to do this, is about transparency with the town and having these conversations with the officials and saying, law enforcement, fire department, the whole deal. What would you guys prefer? What are your issues with things? What would you tolerate? And if you would, here are some benefits. This is why we would like to be able to do this in this way if there's a business demand for it or something like that. So,
Right, there's a whole series of steps that would have to happen after this anyway, so.
right, yeah, and I always I want to remind again, what I'm asking the board for today and what I'm hoping and requesting is something that's just one step in a long
Sure.
chain of conversations with the town on a lot of levels. I'm sure we could, we'll have an ability for the town folks to speak and ask me questions and things like that, which I always appreciate and
Okay.
like being the one to try to answer those questions.
So I have a number of other things that I may want to get to, but at this point, if it's all the same with the board, I would, turn it over to
We'll
Jesse
give you
and
another shot.
leave open the opportunity if I want to at the end.
Selectman Lematic?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Michael, thank us again for coming out. Appreciate it. I'm sure, as although I think the weather is a little warmer towards the city than it is out here in the burbs, as it were. Hopefully it was smooth sailing.
It was.
for this most of the
I moved to Rehoboth recently.
Oh, okay.
So I took it through Rhode Island and got up here pretty quickly, which is nice. So.
Excellent.
But it was a little warmer down there, so it was wet. And then
Yeah.
when I was on 146 and I wasn't able to make a left over at that major intersection, which I thought I would be able to. That's why I was a couple minutes late. I had to turn around, hit a little ice, but I was all right. I'm from here. I get it.
Well,
I know how to
at least,
ski.
I'm glad that you got here
Yeah,
safe and
yeah.
sound. I do have some questions. Some of the questions are personal. Again, I'm just trying to improve my own knowledge of this area because, again, it is a relatively new industry. And, of course, it's new in the Commonwealth as well. A couple of easy questions. Some you may not be able to answer, but what the heck, we'll give it a shot.
Surely.
First question I have for you is why Sutton?
It's a great question. And I usually, if I had my PowerPoint or something like that, it would be on there. This is not an industry where we can pick a town and say, that's the town we want, let's go there, for a variety of reasons, because it's a new industry, it's very competitive, there's a lot of other businesses that are vying for all sorts of different locations for economic reasons or for personal reasons and all that. So we're not a big company with a big war chest of money. We can't go and buy real estate and just have fun with it and throw money around. So we have a very specific business model that requires we look to rent a property. That becomes very specific. You start to figure out if landlords are agreeable to it, if towns are agreeable to it, and the available sites start to limit themselves, and you do your best to figure out where you can put this business. So why Sutton is really because it is a small town which fits our small business model. We look at towns that the bylaws as they're written, and I don't know that Sutton has them specifically, but bylaws that don't allow marijuana businesses to be larger than 10,000 square feet. Those are some of the targets we look for, towns that we feel like there would be a reciprocal relationship. So Sutton fits us, our model in that regard. Marty Green has been the broker for us. He's been very helpful, and he, said this might be a good location for you also. I think, again, the Commonwealth is one kind of unified thing. People who are from here are from here. We're from all sorts of different areas. But the reality is, you know, if somebody wanted a job in their hometown and they couldn't find one, they would go up the street and find one and, you know, bring you know, money into their household, that kind of thing. So we're doing our best to figure out where we can put our business, and Sutton, we're happy, is on the map and somewhat, you know, I'm so happy and thankful that Jen has helped me get this far to sit before you guys and be able to have a legitimate discussion about the nature of this whole thing. So for all those reasons, I think that's why we still have Sutton on our radar and keeping it open and active and trying to figure out where to land this thing.
Okay. I like it. I like it. Now, I understand that medical marijuana is useful. I know there are many ailments that this is, as for medicinal purposes, are being prescribed, things like ALS, AIDS, HIV, Crohn's, epilepsy, and so forth. Again, I don't really know much about the science behind it. Is what you're going to produce, is this a treatment, or is it like a remedy that just kind of eases some of the symptoms of those conditions it's associated with?
Marijuana, I would try to equate to tea, as it is a plant, and the way that it's processed, it's dried versus picking fruit fresh from a tree or something like that. And similar to teas, you have teas that are caffeinated and teas that are anti-inflammatory and the like, and teas that are good for nausea. So what I'm getting at is there's different varietals, which would be how we refer to wines, but strains of cannabis that have different targets on different human maladies and things like that. Some target chronic pain, some target nausea, some target depression and anxiety. So we would be cultivating all of that, all that variety. And as far as treatment, that's really more what the doctors are in place to establish with the patients, is how the marijuana would benefit them. Our job is more in alignment with a pharmacy to make sure we have what doctors are recommending patients use if they decide to recommend they use cannabis versus pharmaceutical remedies and things like that.
You mentioned there were multiple strains. I read somewhere that it's possible to produce some forms that don't have the intoxicant within them. Is that what you're looking to produce?
We would also produce that. I think what you're referring to, if I'm correct, would be one isolated cannabinoid. Those are the compounds in the essential oils that are favored, what people typically react well to in a medical standpoint. So we would produce what's considered CBD, which is one of the cannabinoids that does not have a psychoactive effect. It does still, however, have a very good effect on chronic pain and reduction of cancerous tumors and things like that. That's what the research has shown. There is still a very high demand for cannabis plants that do contain the THC, which one of the effects is what is considered the high or the euphoric feeling. And a lot of times that's what people want from it, because along with all the more debilitating, I should say that loosely, because there's nothing that's less debilitating about somebody struggling with PTSD or depression, but different than, you know, cancer or something like that. A lot of people do use cannabis for anxiety and depression and PTSD. And that, you know, in my opinion, I don't think that should be held at a lesser level or be less critical. I'd rather people use cannabis than be taking Xanax and having alcohol with it, which is something I see happen all too often, or taking some sort of pharmaceutical drug that has some sort of adverse side effect. That's why it's been voted in, is because people don't like having to take pharmaceutical remedies and that being the only thing that's available to them. So I think we would produce cannabis that covers the spectrum of whatever maladies there are. Yeah, we'll make some version of our version of that to try to bring that to the market.
Okay, you mentioned that you'd be able to remove from the leaves oil. Mm-hmm. What form ultimately is the product that you're going to produce?
So when we talk about concentrates, that's a great question. The ice water extract has like a gummy consistency. I would consider it like a piece of
Chewable vitamin or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, exactly. You would still heat it to have it activate. That's part of why people smoke it, is because the cannabinoids become active at about 230 degrees and upwards. You get more carcinogens the higher that temperature goes, so that's why physicians will recommend a vaporizer or to eat it. Eating it, though, in my feeling and my experience with this stuff, and I'm happy to say it, a lot of people get great benefit from eating marijuana, but it's something where the reactions are different in your stomach than they are in your lungs. So you could never overdose from it and kill yourself from the actual chemical, but you can have a tough time if you take too much marijuana eating it. So I still have the highest kind of regard for keeping that in a special category and trying to figure out how to deal with that, with the dosing of it and the availability of it and the safe packaging of edible marijuana. But as it relates to the concentrate that we're talking about with the ice water, that would still be heated or smoked to get the effect. And for somebody who is dealing with something serious, the more potent dose of the cannabis in that form where it's concentrated is really what gives them the most well-being, and that's our goal. So we're not we can't find one hat that fits everybody with this stuff, so to speak. The other form, just before I forget, as I mentioned it, the panini press, it's simply a way of hot extracting the oils out of anything. And in this case, we're not talking about hops to make beer. We're talking about cannabis fruits to make concentrates. So you put a weight amount of cannabis on this press, and you press it, and you get a heat extraction oil that is then again heated to be utilized by the patient.
Now, what you produced, you'd mentioned that you'd have a relationship with doctors, because obviously this is a prescription.
It's recommendation.
Recommendation.
Yeah.
Would you do businesses with pharmacies, or you mentioned that you would have a delivery service potentially?
Well,
or would this be you controlling the dispersal to the customer?
Great question. In Massachusetts, we are required by the Department of Public Health to have a vertically integrated business. So if we had a cultivation site in Sutton that handled cultivation and processing, we would be required to have some sort of retail use somewhere else in the Commonwealth. On top of that, we do have an allowance to provide to other registered marijuana dispensaries in the Commonwealth.
But your product would never go to like a CVS.
Correct. No, there's no ability for us to do that with any of those businesses, nor would the state allow us to do that. And those businesses still, because there's no regulations on that would be an adult use thing. We can't cross over into that, and that brings me back to, it's a recommendation that's allowed, but not a prescription. Prescription, the language relates more to some of the federal guidelines on controlling substances and things like that.
All right,
So
if I use prescription, I apologize.
no, not an
Proper
apology at all. No, I think it's an important distinction, because the language, a lot of people refer to it as a doctor's prescription, but that's a very specific form that allows certain things.
Okay.
So it's a doctor's recommendation to use marijuana, and that's why they've built this industry around that versus it running parallel with pharmaceutical industries or something like that. When and if the federal regulations change, it would be something that would probably become prescribed rather than recommended, and it probably would have a place somewhere in a pharmacy.
I'm glad that you mentioned federal, because I suppose this is probably the hardball question that I do have.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned earlier in your presentation, marijuana in any form is still illegal. It's still considered a Schedule I drug at the federal level. Since federal law supersedes state law, do you, as does a member of an industry have any concerns or fears that maybe this administration might actually enforce federal law more severely than the previous administration? Or do you sense that at the federal level there's a trend going in favor of the industry which you're part of?
Great question. I always remind everybody when I train people in these facilities that this is federally illegal. So please know that moving forward. And I would say the same thing to the town, and I know that the town and the town's council will also have that same feedback as well. That being said, I'm more than confident that now that this is out in the open, especially from a medical standpoint, that it's not in any kind of jeopardy. I think that the target, if there were for this administration and for any administration, would still be this advent of the adult use recreational businesses. I think that from what I know about politics and this administration, from what I can tell, is that they certainly do honor a state's rights in one element, and they also seem to want to capture business and try to bring domestic revenue up. So I think those are points that will keep them on both sides. I think really what the federal government has shown in all these years is that it's there as a tool to be called upon in any instant by the state if the state has any issue regulating these businesses. And that's from some of the memos that have been passed down from the federal government, that seems to be where they're okay staying right now. So there was a coal memo that was passed that has a lot of the guidelines that was passed in 2010 for how states should proceed. And the basic consensus, again, that the state follows with its application is we don't want money coming from places where it shouldn't come from and therefore go back into those places, like some international drug cartel or something like that. We don't want them funding our medical marijuana businesses in this country. And the other is to keep it out of the hands of people who shouldn't have it, namely children, which is important. So everything is kind of built on those two fundamentals as far as what the federal government's mostly concerned about. And their jurisdiction, which is superseding everything, is a benefit for the states to be able to say, we're having trouble with this group that we gave a permit to, engage in marijuana business in our state, and we can't control it. And now the federal government can use their jurisdiction to control it and handle whatever issues those businesses might cause. So again, all the way back to why I prefer a small business. I don't think with a small business model you really raise many red flags in this marijuana industry, and on the contrary, I think that it's probably seen as something good to test the waters, to not invite these huge businesses into these areas to create many times over $1 million entities, because the marijuana is valuable from a criminal standpoint because it has a dollar value to it, not because they want to put it on their walls and adorn their homes with it. So if you create a larger business model, you inherently are going to have more eyes on you from enforcement standpoint, saying, are they out of compliance, and is that an asset we can seize, or from a criminal element where they're reading the dollar signs and doing their due diligence as criminals, I guess. So to answer your question, I don't believe that there's much concern on a federal level. As long as we're in compliance with the state, I think that we're very low on the totem pole as far as things that could go awry. And I think the main staple of that is the fact that it's this business we're talking about is a medical marijuana business. It seems to be overwhelmingly understood at this point here in 2017 that this stuff has some medical benefits, and there's they're two separate conversations about the adult use recreational versus the medical use of it.
I had one last question.
Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You mentioned that in your previous experience that you were working out at a site out in California?
Yes.
During your time there, and again, I don't know if you want to honestly answer this question. I hope you do. Did anything bizarre, I guess I phrase it that way, occur in regard to the facility and its relationship with the municipality in which it was located? Anything that was unpredicted? Anything that was just soured the relationship, I guess?
No, we had a very good track record with the city of Long Beach. We never had any security issues at our facilities or anything like that that would create issue.
Procedurally, in terms of security?
Sure.
Are you looking to replicate the same basic model? or-
Absolutely, yeah. That's and again, with that, I'll kind of just mention our business model generates about $1 million a year in revenue, somewhere in there, which to me is a big number, but in this industry is not such a big number at all. It's very small. So with that, again, you just through your business model, you can mitigate issues. By keeping it small, you just attract less of the wrong attention that you would not want to attract.
It's easy
And
to slide under the radar, so to speak.
yeah, and not in a malicious way or anything like that. Really, just in a way of saying, it's like anything, like a liquor store, and I hate equating cannabis to alcohol, but as far as a controlled substance, liquor stores have undesirable characters that could maybe stay too close to them or loiter or something to that effect. And they have issues. They get robbed and they have valuable stuff there. So banks, the same thing. You're talking about just something that's sensitive, and that's one of the benefits of working in Nevada is Nevada has the most robust requirements in their medical marijuana industry because of the gaming industry. So when they look at where money comes from for these businesses to start, they're extremely well vetted. And they also have just that brand in Nevada and Las Vegas and in Reno. So the requirements are very strict, and it ultimately ends up being a good thing because it forces us to have very strict protocols to protect our business and to protect the stakeholders at the town level, the state level, the patients, the people involved, the whole 9 yards. So I think that there's something to be said for keeping it small and in compliant with all these different regulations that you have that just ultimately keep it safe. And with that being said, I don't have anything really that I could say that we've ever had anything to sour our relationship in the town. I've been very fortunate to have a good track record. We stress customer service and make sure people are happy and well educated and understand what they're doing, and make sure to cultivate good human beings as well as a good product and the whole thing. And I say that not in an attempt to be arrogant, but just in a way to promote kind of some sustainable thinking and safe practices so that people are pursuing liberty and happiness and all that stuff. I'm a big proponent for those things.
Here. I agree with much of what you said at that last point. Very good. At this time, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mike, most of my questions will be facility operated. You're aware the planning board is working on rules, laws, and regulations within our town through Jen.
Yeah.
You indicated 3,000 square foot. Is that big enough for what you want to do, an expansion, if there was to be ever expansion or an investment?
I think if we were faced with the opportunity to expand, we would seek approval for another facility or something to that effect. I think that, this again is a young industry, and for our business model, it is enough. I know that a lot of these businesses in the state have shortages of products and things like that, but I think our goal would be to kind of establish proof of product with the town. This is what we can do safely with this amount of space, and if that works for 24 months, 36 months, and in that time we're also looking at potentially expanding, we would consider that. Again, this is about a transparency with the town and figuring out where the town wants to work with us. For us, our main motivation is something small. So we've always had 3,000 square feet as sufficient to generate that roughly $1.5 million a year in revenue. That works for us at that size.
But you talked on security. You said security 4 times. Expand on it.
Sure. Well, let's talk about it, kind of trickle it down all the way to the people involved. But first, we have security that's in place from the state level to vet the business. So I've had background checks with the state. All my partners in this business have had background checks with the state. So that's one level of it. When we hire personnel, they have to go through the same background checks that we do. So if we're hiring folks locally, they have to meet these requirements before the state will give them an agent card. So everybody that works for us has to go through the same process. Fact is, we don't have a business open right now, so we only have the initial folks who have gone through that process. So that's one element with sort of the internal aspect of it. And most issues that would ever arise would happen internally. You know, we're not looking at somebody, you know, driving a dump truck through the wall and trying to send out a bunch of assailants for us. It's more somebody who works for us, who understands the business operations, who figures out a way to sneak behind a wall and stash some product or some money or something like that, or invites their cronies in to commit a crime against us because they know the revolving door is going to open at this time or something like that. So how we abate and mitigate those issues is, again, when you run a background check, that's your first layer of qualifying somebody's, you know, allowance to be a part of a sensitive business like this. But we have timestamps for signatures for everything, regular inventory controls that are mandatory, camera coverage throughout the facility, and we reserve rights to check people in our business. It's a private business, so if we need to make sure everyone empties pockets in and out of the facility, we do that, and we reserve the right to do that. So that becomes a way of making sure we impart all the secure practices for non-diversion of inventory and things like that, and obviously cash practices. From an exterior standpoint, you know, you could have a standing guard. In my experience, sometimes having a standing guard creates an easy target for a criminal because they can say, that's the guy we got to deal with. When they don't see a guard there, they have no idea where the guards are, and that, in my experience, keeps people from wanting to jump on those situations. And then you're not, you know, I've worked hand in hand with law enforcement and with security companies for a while, and the last thing they ever want to do is put one of their guys in a dangerous situation where he's cornered in a booth or, you know, by himself and can't escape a situation or something like that. We would never have firearms or anything like that on the premises. I think the great benefit, and to me why I like getting involved in these regulated markets, is because there's such a nice thing about being able to call the police if you ever need help. That's really a great benefit, is to be able to call local law enforcement and say, we have a situation. And, you know, in being a part of this industry as it's come up out of the dark ages, you know, you certainly know the difference in never being able to resort on calling your local peace and police officers for help because it's been an illegal trade forever. So that's a great benefit, and we try to use that to our advantage. You know, again, we're talking about a cultivation facility versus a dispensary, but for the sake of it, because like I said, we would love to open a dispensary in Sutton also, not just a cultivation. We just don't know exactly the process or how to do that based on the bylaws, lack thereof, and zoning and things like that. But part of securing your business is creating price points that are fair, obviously, but competitive. So I'll give you for instance, we wouldn't want to have a retail business where we're selling product at such an affordable rate that it quickly incentivizes someone to come in and buy it and then go sell it on the black market. So one of the elements to our business is kind of high-end boutique. You know, we grow very high-quality cannabis strains. We have an ability at our level with our horticultural understanding to identify those qualities with cannabis and make that available. And something I've always said to, you know, project developers is it costs just as much to grow inferior product as it does to grow superior product. So you should just make sure you grow the best product you can, and if you need to water it down, you can for whatever reason. You know, not everybody likes to to engage the highest potent cannabis, but there, like I said, there's ways to work with that with recommended dosing and things like that, but it just doesn't really serve you to grow an inferior product. Anyway, that being said, the the model just creates price points on a retail level that doesn't create a demand for people who would want to come in under any guise and buy product and then redistribute it for some sort of profit or something like that. And that's one layer of security measure from a retail use. I hope I've brought some clarity to your question.
Do you see any water and sewage regulation problems at that site for that type of operation?
Interestingly, that's a great question. We don't use that much water. We don't use that much weight per square foot when you talk about it architecturally. We probably use 100 gallons of water a day to water plants. You know, we're really similar to a full household. You know, six kids, that kind of thing. We don't use any chemicals on our plants. Everything is Organic Materials Review Institute certified. We do very little foliar spray, which would be topically spraying the plants just to keep their leaves clean and able to respirate and make sure we keep pest at bay if that were ever an instance. I impart a integrated pest management protocol is what it's referred to, where you're always treating so that you don't have something that you then have to treat. So we treat our plants with organic sprays and the like regularly, even when they don't have any issues, and that's what keeps them safe and clean. We use organic soil that we can source locally, or we can outsource from some of the different providers for that stuff. But our protocols and standard operating procedures for the cultivation are dialed in well enough that there's not an element of runoff water. For instance, we don't have pooling of water or anything like that under our plants, and I can just kind of describe my protocols are what's considered a 3-gallon nursery container. It's about a foot in diameter and about a foot tall, and one plant sits in there, and that allows one person to be able to use it in a variety of different situations from a workflow standpoint. So rather than having a 400-gallon container with a marijuana plant that's 2 stories tall, I like to have them small and accessible so that one person, if left alone, can climb out of a situation and move and access the plants freely.
Okay, good, thank you. I'm going to send you back to Selectman Hall for his final remarks.
Okay, sure.
Can I ask a couple more questions? Is that
You may
okay?
go right ahead.
So first of all, you guys covered a lot of it, and you've been very informative. I
Sure.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
It's
my
very well
pleasure.
thought out. Jesse asked you some questions about your experiences in California relative to the facility, but you opened your remarks saying that you've been involved in some successes and some failures. And you've learned from your failures. Can you give us a little bit of sense of the failures?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So even in California, I worked as a consultant for a management company. The management company managed 5 independent non-for-profits, and we tried to open one and make it successful and use the revenues to kind of continuously open the rest. We were only able to get 2 of them operational before the moratorium was put in place, which wasn't because of any of the permitted group's conduct or anything like that. It was just it was actually somebody who was not issued a license sued the city, and it became sour for all the groups that had worked hard to get through that process. So, when you get into these facilities, you're looking at a warehouse that was built to house boxes and old supplies, and now you're going to try to figure out how to retrofit that into a marijuana cultivation facility that has high intense discharge lighting and power needs and HVAC needs. So one of the issues that I had run into, which brings me, I'll get there, a lack of funding and a lack of support and regulation in this industry created issues for us where we were, shorting out power lines. We didn't have capacity for power, and we couldn't really run a good business. So one of the things I commend the department on is requiring a minimum amount of money for a group to have, so that way they actually have the capacity to do this and do it safely and make sure that the facilities are up to code. So that was one learning lesson, that if you don't have the right funding, you can't have a successful business, because you need to have all those safety nets in place so that you can actually run the business well. You need to have monies in reserve so that if the business doesn't generate revenue for several years, you're not watching crops fail or something to that effect. Part of my, this is maybe 8 years ago now, but part of why I have such a strict regimen to abate any kind of pest or mold issue or anything like that is because I've watched, again, this lack of funding and lack of ability to buy the resources necessary to keep the plants healthy. I've watched entire crops be annihilated by crop-specific pests and things like that. So those are the negative experiences that have led me to have a much more successful approach.
So that actually, for me, is a really helpful segue because, again, as I was reading sort of about the facilities themselves, you just touched on some of the issues that, that I read about, again, going back to the lighting and life safety issues with fumigation, possible fire hazards and things of that nature, pest control. And what it sounded like to me was that to do this right, you need a fairly significant financial investment. And so I don't know if you have an answer to this yet, but is there a budget in place
Absolutely.
to renovate the building and get it into?
Yes. I'll just, for instance, the state requires a minimum of $500,000. You have to show that money available in a bank account in order to even apply for the first phase application establishing a legitimate non-for-profit. So you have to establish a legitimate non-for-profit and show where that non-for-profit is funded all in one piece. So with that, yes, we do have monies put towards renovating the space and bringing it up to our specs and the local codes and operating it for the amount of time needed until we feel sufficiently comfortable to
So
start
you and your
generating
team have
revenue.
put together a financial plan that you think is sound to
Yes.
be able to do all those things you just
We do,
mentioned?
yeah. And we're hyper conservative in trying to accomplish this. Someone like myself, being able to kind of work pro bono for my friends and family and all that with respect to this business is always an added benefit. So we've done our best to try to figure out how little money we need to do this, but we also have enough money in the event that we can't keep our tight conservative budget.
And I guess the last line of questioning that I had is just kind of regarding product control. Mm-hmm. I'm imagining the community asking questions around how you, as a facility operator, can ensure that your product is not getting into the hands of the wrong people. So,
Sure.
Like anything that's regulated, I assume that there must be a lot of record-keeping requirements around how much you produce and where the product goes once it leaves your facility.
Yep.
And in a second, I'll ask you to touch on that a little bit. But, given that this is not a prescription product, as you say, it's a recommendation product. How do you, on the outflow side, ensure that the product is going to the right people in the right quantities? And again, you mentioned your concern about somebody, if your product is priced at a low price point, sort of buying up enough product and reselling it.
Right.
To me, that makes me concerned over how you know that the product is really going to the ultimate end user.
Yeah. No, great.
Needs it as a medical use.
Great question. The state has, in order to be a patient, you have to register with the Department of Public Health. And consequently, the Department of Public Health monitors all these businesses and oversees all these businesses. So when we have any kind of sale, there's a manifest that has to show that. So our inventory control is three-part. It's a digital software that we use for inventory control. It's an analog, traditional written-down log version with sign and witness, and then it's also video timestamps, meaning cameras everywhere watching the timing that all these things say occurred. So on all the labeling and packaging, times when it happens, and weights or quantity values for whatever the medium is, whether it's a flour or a concentrate or something like that. One is measured in weight, one maybe is measured as a quantitative thing in a number form. So those have to correspond with amounts that go out in a car and are delivered to a registered patient. So there are inventory controls in place, and along with that comes regular audits, surprise audits. It's not like they say, hey, we'll be there in a week, make sure to have everything tied up. They show up and they see if the amount of plants in your building are the same as are in your computer, and they have to be the same or else you risk foregoing your license with the state. Same thing with quantities of finished products and the like. And then they'll also look at your manifest. Who have you been delivering this stuff to? Where has your vehicle been? What was it doing here? So it's our responsibility as a business to have all these things in place for the state. And if we do our job and make sure to be beyond what the compliance requires, then the state is more than satisfied. That all sounds great, but there's still that sounds great. What else? And to that, I think that at the end of it all, there's always a level of social responsibility and social accountability. So in this world, there's so many things that are dangerous, and we use them all the time. Scissors, cars, the whole deal. They have an ability to be dangerous if used incorrectly, and we have a level of social accountability that people won't drive 200 miles an hour. They won't run with the scissors. And for this, you reach that point where you can't govern something or legislate something entirely safe, because at the end of the day, people inherently need to also practice a level of safety and live up to that expectation. So, just like pharmaceutical drugs, they come from the pharmacy, they go into mother's cabinet, and magically someone goes in there and takes them, and they shouldn't. And we can't figure out a way to put RFID tracking on pills and govern that. So inherently, there's always going to be a question about to what extent we can control this. And we'll do everything in compliance with the state to make sure we do that and more. Like I said, our business practices are things that aren't required by the state, but we do that because we know that those practices make the business safer. So I think, that I hope that satisfies your question.
Sure, absolutely. I don't actually have any more questions, so I don't know.
Dave has one. Oh, Jesse has one more.
Yeah, I thought of two in regards to one of the questions that you had asked, Mike. Is the site at Johns Road, the building itself, structurally speaking, is what's there sufficient to house all of the necessary modifications that you're going to have to implement into the building to get your business up and running? Better HVAC, more electrical options to contain the heat and all the rest?
Sure, great question. Again, with a business that only generates $1 million a year, you don't really require more than 400 amps of service. That would be a lot. We could manage it with 200 amps of service, so that's standard. We really don't need that much. The high intense lighting fixtures run 240 volt rather than 120 volt, and that brings the amperage down on what they draw. So we would have roughly 40 of those high intense light fixtures in the building. And we would probably have another 40 of these T5 light fixtures in the building to control the different phases of growth. The prefabricated containers, which I may have sent imagery of, I'm not sure, it was a while ago when I sent the stuff for the docket, they come also with 7-ton HVAC units and are all self-contained. They're basically plug and play. You just work with your mechanical engineers and architect and all the plumbing engineers, etc., to wire the building to deliver these prefabricated containers, and then you just plug them in and they're ready to go. So my answer to your question is yes. The facility as it is today requires, relatively speaking, very little to bring it up to our specs for what we would need.
Okay, and if I suppose we don't have to do any significant upgrades. Timetable. Say you get approved by the state tomorrow.
Yeah.
How long would it take before you could open your doors?
If we got approved by, if we got approved by the state today, I would say comfortably, 9 months until we open the doors and start generating revenue. That gives us 3 months, which is a stretch, to outfit the building and get it ready, and it gives us 6 months to generate 2 full cycles of crops, so that we're not capturing one crop of the facility's capacity and then opening the doors, but rather making sure we have something substantial to open the doors with. And I'll just kind of give you some more details. The way cannabis grows is it takes roughly 2 months to come to fruition, and then it takes another 3 or 4 weeks to dry. And in that time, you're testing it, so you can run that timetable parallel. When we run our business, in order to keep it small and keep it efficient in its tight box, we have what's called a perpetual harvest. So, for instance, we don't have the entire building flowering and finishing all in one moment in time. On the contrary, you would take the building and kind of imagine it broken up into 8 or 9 sections where, and again, another layer of security. It's not good to have a building full of marijuana that has a measurable value on it, which it does when it's flowering. It doesn't really when it's in its vegetative process. But when it's flowering, if you're a criminal, that's something you can turn into cash. Right. So we would not have more than 30% of the building in that phase of growth, and it would cycle once a week. And that, again, when you talk about space requirements, if you have a whole 3,000 square feet that is going to flower and finish, you then need roughly the same amount of square feet to hang it and dry. So, and it's perishable. It's not, we don't make shovel heads or something like that. This is a dried herb, and it's highly perishable, especially in different climates, whether they're dry or humid or something like that. So you can be more efficient with your personnel when they're only having to worry about, 8 to 12% of a total crop on a weekly basis, rather than 100% of a perishable crop that needs to be handled in a timely fashion. So anyway, that's kind of how the process works. After 9 months, we should have the ability to be generating product weekly and meeting our demand. And a good problem for us to have is that we have a shortage, and we need to come back to the table and figure out how to address that.
Well, I do not want to put words in the mouth of my colleagues, but I found your presentation very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you again
I
for coming
appreciate
out.
your time, and my pleasure answering questions as it relates to this stuff. I'm very much enjoy trying to bring my perspective to it, and I'm a family guy. I don't have children, but I have a dog and 2 cats, and I have 2 nieces and a nephew, and it's something that is very important to me, is to make sure that this industry has the right branding, or the right people involved who understand this stuff, and care about those family values, as well as understand trying to address people's common concerns, which are always valid. And some of the things, I can always appreciate some of them. I always want to draw some more clarity to and try to create parallel lines of thinking so that people can kind of come off assuming that marijuana is something bad, but sometimes that the way that it's used or the way that it's deployed can be the negative thing. So I appreciate your guys' time, and I'm pleased to hear that my presentation was informative. It makes me feel
Thank you.
like a game. Good.
If my colleagues would listen for a motion.
Well,
Do you want,
Can I make a proposal?
you guys want to talk?
well, yeah, I was probably thinking the same thing as you are. I mean, obviously, John's not here tonight, neither is Mike. I think it might be better if we take this under advisement and give the whole board a chance to contemplate this before we put forward a motion.
In addition to that, the planning board is working on some recommendations around citing issues and things of that nature, and I I'd really like to hear from them on their thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, they've got perspective on this that is beyond my expertise, so I'd really like to hear from them on that as well. But if I may, Mr. Chairman, I would really like to thank Michael for
Yes.
his presentation. I think I would echo what Jesse said. It was really informative. You clearly are very well versed in the issues around this type of operation.
I appreciate
and
that.
You've represented your group very well
I'm
tonight.
sorry
so.
that I didn't have anyone else here, but
I don't think you need them. You
Ah.
might be a little tired of talking.
I usually tell them, let me take the questions. You guys just smile and nod. If they have anything specific to ask you, go ahead. Joseph has a 3-year-old daughter, like I said. Drew, his brother, has 2 children, and Jason has 3. So they're busy guys, and I figure,
Yep.
let me go out there and drive around in the snow for a little while. You guys hang tight. No, I appreciate your time, and maybe I could just say, hopefully after discussion, maybe in a few weeks or something to that effect, we could figure out if you guys would be willing to give us a letter of non-opposition so we could, again, start down the road and continue moving forward. That would be appreciated, but
Terrific. Thank
leave
you.
it in your hands. All right, very good. Thank you so much.
So we're gonna take this under advisement, so the full board is available to see it, and your explanation and everything is on TV, and they'll be able to view it at
Great.
home, and on the notes.
James and I have been in contact, and Deborah as well, so if you need
We'll
to
continue to stay in
send me
contact.
emails or
Yep.
whatever and figure out how to move forward, that would be great.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks
for
very
Thank you
coming.
all so much. Yeah.
Drive
appreciate
carefully.
Yeah, drive safely home.
Take care. Pleasure to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Very
Appreciate it.
much. Yep. And go Patriots. I know that
Yeah.
goes
Yep.
without saying.
Go Patriots.
They already went.
That's true. They did it well.
They did it. Okay. You guys all enjoy. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank
Take
you.
care.
Appreciate it.
Now next, the town administrator's update, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few updates for the board. The FY18 budget update, it's a work in progress. The governor released his budget on Wednesday, January 25th. The town received $28,440 in Chapter 70, which is generally referred to as school aid, and unrestricted general government aid, or UGA. Net of charges, $21,630. The total state aid is a little over $50,000. Chapter 70 is an additional $20 per student, which is pretty much the minimal aid that the governor can provide. Last year, the legislature increased that minimum aid from $20 per student to $55 per student, and that was sort of helpful. That brought that $28,000 number up to $55,000, which, gives us a little bit more money to run the department. So I'm really hoping that the legislature takes the governor's number and increases it over time. And we're starting, I think the schools are starting a collaborative effort to get in touch with the legislators and let them know how important that money is, particularly to the school department. The school department has a little over $15 million budget, and this is $28,000. It doesn't do much for them at this point in time. I received a draft copy of the compensation plan. I hired a company to look at the compensation of department heads. We are paying department heads very closely to what other towns are paying, which is good news. There are a few small adjustments in department head salaries, but I'm comfortable overall with where we stand with the department heads. But the most I've increased some department head salaries by $3,500, $2,000, small amounts of numbers, because our range is pretty close to where other towns are in the 13 surrounding communities, as far away as West Boylston. So that's good news. Police station building project. We received 3 responses to the RFQ. For design, the responses came from Flansburgh, RGB Architects, and Tecton Architects. The Designer Selection Committee met on Tuesday, January 21st, and selected Tecton as the preferred selection. I've already begun negotiations with Tecton. I had a conference call with the chairperson, Wendy Mead, John Kuchar, Chief Toll, and myself met over the phone with Tecton lead Jeff McElravy. Is that how you say his last name? I don't know. So we're working on a contract. Hopefully that will be done shortly. Net metering deal. I've been working with a couple of consultants who brought me a net metering proposition. We're still in discussions, but it appears that we will be able to receive 20% off our utility bills, our electric bills, in the WCMA National Grid District, which is essentially Western Mass. And that is Town Hall, the school departments, the highway department, Wilkes Fire Station, and so forth. SEMA is the Southeastern Mass, which incorporates, our town is separated in two districts, WCMA and SEMA. SEMA is in the south part of town, which involves the sewer treatment facility, the senior center, Manchog Fire, and the pump stations in that area. The sewer treatment plant, obviously, is part of that. I may have mentioned that. I am still looking for a deal in the SEMA district. But again, we've had these propositions come before us time and time again, and at the end, it just doesn't work out. So hopefully this one works out. I'm familiar with Orlando Pacheco, who's a former town administrator in the town of Lancaster. So hopefully it works out. He's a good person to work with. I'm hoping that comes to fruition. Because ultimately that would provide an additional 20% off the electricity bills over at the school department is probably over $30,000 in savings on an annual basis. So that's a great return on investment. In addition, we have overspent snow and ice. I ran the Munis report yesterday. Right now we're $5,000 over, and winter doesn't seem to be stopping soon, according to the groundhog. As well as the weather outside. So I would like a motion from the board to overspend snow and ice. The process is I get approval from the Board of Selectmen, then I need to go to the Finance Committee and get their authorization to overspend snow and ice. We budgeted $175,000 this year. We increased it $25,000 at fall town meeting from $150 to $175. The real cost driver is salt, the cost of salt that we throw down on the streets as a material to treat mainly ice and some snow. We've spent over $110,000 just on salt alone. So that's the majority of our snow and ice budget. Hopefully, winter ends shortly and we don't overrun that cost too much, but I feel comfortable that we've increased that money to a more appropriate level versus $125 a few years ago. That's all I have for updates. And I would appreciate a motion. If not, I'll wait till the next Selectmen's meeting and present it at that point in time. But by then we may be significantly over snow and ice.
Do you guys want to talk about the motion before we go any further?
Yeah, I think we might as well.
Yeah.
If I may, just quickly, right, that line item in the budget is one of two items that we're statutorily allowed to overspend every year.
Right.
Because of, you can't control it, you have to. So.
Yeah, I did. I actually had one question just from a learning perspective because I think this is the first time I've been involved with such a motion. If we tailor a motion, do we basically green light the ability to overspend and sky's the limit, or do we actually have to, in the motion, give a monetary amount?
No, you just allow the highway department to continue doing their job and treating the roads, whether it's snow or whether it's ice or sleet or whatever the situation is.
And it's definitely a job they do very efficiently.
And hopefully the board appreciates what they do, and I know you do, but I do, because I know Matt Stencil does a great job, as does Lyman and the rest of the crew. Very small crew, but they do a great job with the resources they have. So my hope is that the board would make this motion, and knowing that, we obviously pay attention to the money we're spending. We don't do it haphazardly. We do what we need to do to make sure there's safe access to the roads in town.
If I can make one other commentary, this this doesn't feel like a winter. We've had a lot of snow, but I know at my work, we've had the same issue, that we've spent a lot of money this year on snow and ice because they've had to do a lot of sanding and salting because we've had a lot of events where we've had, either snow or rain and then melting and just a lot of slippery situations that have had to be dealt
The
with.
long duration, too. It's not just to go out and put some salt down and then you're done. You go out, put some salt down, and then 3-4 hours later, you get a call from the
Yeah.
police department. You need to go out again, and then you go out a number of times. So
That's exactly what we've had.
it's a weird winter.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with Matt not too long ago, and he basically, assured me personally that this would be one area that he would never second guess. If the roads need it, he's going to go out and treat them properly because, again, it's a safety issue.
And that's what I like about him. And I think that, I don't want to second guess anything. I want to know that the roads are treated and taken care of because, the safety of the public traveling those roads is utmost importance.
I think it was our last meeting. We got out of our meeting, roughly this time of night, and went downstairs, and we had an event, and Matt was actually down in the office downstairs
That's when I had the
coordinating the
conversation
whole
with him,
issue. So,
Yeah.
If you guys are okay with it, I would like to make a motion that we authorize the town administrator to overspend the snow and ice budget.
And I'd like to second that, if that's all right.
Thank you.
Quite welcome.
Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you.
Vote?
Aye.
Aye. I kind of thought we voted, but
Yeah.
that's all right. My mistake.
So if I can go back to the town administrator's update, thank you, Jim. Good update. I'm I don't know what the right word is. I guess it's satisfying, maybe that's it, to know that you've done the survey with the other towns relative to your department heads, and interesting, because I think you told us it's been a long time since you've formally done this.
Yeah, 10 years.
Yeah. But you're still sort of right on the number, so.
What's nice is even the 1 year they took a 0, and I hear about that from time to time, but, they've done a good job, and I've given them 2% increases every year, and now this year we're giving them a 2.5% increase. So those increases over that 10-year period of time have kept up with the other communities. I don't know what they've done, but
Somehow it worked.
it seemed like we're treating them fairly, or at least as far as compensation.
Now, you said you made a couple of tweaks.
Yes.
Is that prospective, just relative to the new budget coming up? or is
Yes.
it- Okay.
Yeah, that's FY18. The planning director got a $3,500 increase. The town treasurer got, because they were underpaid relative to their comparables.
Right.
But otherwise, I feel comfortable with where we're paying people.
Okay. Moving on to the police station building project, I guess the only comment I have is I'm happy to see that things are moving at a pace,
It is.
It seems to be moving forward quickly, and I'm
We,
glad to hear that.
our goal is to have this at Maytown meeting, and we're moving towards that. I think Tecton will probably have the ability to get the design done prior to the next police station building committee meeting. We're going to tour a police station out in Wilbraham, which I believe is a project that CMS and Tecton are working on together.
Okay.
So we'll be able to see their working relationship and how that project looks. The chief has also gone out and sent out some of his officers to write a report on a number of police offices or stations that they have visited. And they're going to produce a report to the chief, and the chief is going to present that to the building committee. So while we don't necessarily have time to do tours of a number of stations, we're going to get that tour on March 1st of Wilbraham, and then the chief will provide some additional information.
And at a certain level, I think you rely on the professionals that you hire to sort of know what, kind of what the state of the industry is, and
Right.
provide you with a good plan, so.
Right.
Just on the net metering deal, how long do you anticipate that deal would run for?
20 years.
20 years? And, so that was good commentary that you had. that
With
we've tried
no
to-
escalator. I mean, which is was one of the deal breakers, one of the last deals. They had a 3% escalator on the floor price. The floor price is 8 cents, which is good. I don't think electricity is ever going to be below 8 cents. But that floor price over 20 years increased to 11 cents. Now it's getting a little cloudy. This is a level floor price at 8 cents per kilowatt hour, and I like the people I'm dealing with.
Yeah. Well, opportunities to save 20% of your electricity cost in the area of the town that probably uses the most electricity.
Right.
They don't come along every day, so.
Right.
I think that's valuable, so. Great, thank you.
Jesse?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick comments. I think it's, as far as the state funding goes, like every single year, it's always up in the air. You never know what's going on. The sky is falling. Everything's coming up roses. You never know. And ultimately, I hope that they move enough in the right direction that, we will see some benefit. Even if it's marginal, I would rather have us, enjoy an increase or at least level funding than see any potential cuts.
Yeah.
As far as the compensation plan, I think it was a good time to do it. And again, I'm like Dave said, I'm very pleased that we're, for the most part, in line with the other towns because, as I strongly believe, we have a fantastic staff in all our departments. And part of the reason for that, and of their love and their dedication, is who's in charge of each individual department. And so knowing that they are being fairly compensated, we're just going to keep efficiency
Yeah.
going forward for the foreseeable future. So thank you for taking the time for doing that. I'm very excited about the tour. I can't wait. That ought to be interesting as far as the police station building project goes. And net metering, again, we had a conversation about that.
Right.
I really wasn't sure exactly what it was, but I appreciate your forthright and bringing me up to speed. And I'm glad to know that at least the potential's there to get us locked into that some type of deal, which ultimately will benefit for.
At some point, when this gets further along and we are reaching the deal level, I will have these people come before the Board of Selectmen, present a PowerPoint presentation to the point that you folks are all on board, understand how this is going to work, and it's mutual buy-in at that point.
Right. Yeah, at least the potential's there.
Right.
And again, the ball's rolling. So hopefully everything will materialize properly. And again, we'll not only see a benefit financially, but again, we'll be able to have ability to plan for the future. So I think it's great.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Jim.
Sure.
Thank you. Jim, again, update rate. The raises, the people that are getting them, it's great for them, and they should be happy to have this job in the town of Sutton.
Yeah.
Great place to work for. Gotta send a thank you out to Wendy Mead
Yeah.
for, again, taking another building project on.
I know. Seriously. She's a
Send her a
glutton for
check.
punishment.
I didn't want to go that, but yes. And number 4, we shouldn't be afraid to do the overspending for the highway. It's under your management. The dollar's not going anywhere where it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And that's all I have.
Good.
So we can go to announcements. I have one, Selectmen's Roundtable, and correspondence are coming up. So, any announcements?
I don't have an announcement, no.
Okay?
I just have 2 quick thank yous, if I may.
Do it.
First and foremost, I'd like to thank the generosity once again for everyone at St. Mark's. We did the monthly drop-off at the Mike Chizzy Food Pantry, and in years past, obviously the generosity seems to be forthcoming around the holidays, and now we've moved past them, but St. Mark's, we have a wonderful community there, and the generosity is being consistent. We had 3 carloads of food that was delivered. So hopefully, again, Michelle is happy. And again, thank you to everyone involved who made donations to make this, once again, a wonderful event. And secondly, I would like to thank all of the parents and the students who attended last night's meeting. Friends of Sutton football were involved, and you had a lot of students come forward and speak about a sport in which they love. So regardless of the outcome, it was nice to see the passion was there and the dedication, and hopefully everything will move in the right direction for everyone involved.
Okay, and the tag off of yours. Michelle says thanks to the church, and says that things are very well in the food pantry.
I actually have an unrelated comment,
Unrelated.
just if we're on the next topic here. I just wanted to thank this board, actually. The presentation that we had tonight from Mr. Dreyer took a long time, but the nature of the issue, I think, is important to the residents in town here, and I think it was appropriate for us to take a long time and to consider it carefully. So, I think we took the first steps to doing that tonight. Personally, I thought he did a great presentation, but there's a lot to consider there, and so just thanks for listening.
Great. So, roundtable? Correspondence? I have one correspondence from a gentleman in town, Mr. Dwyer, is now living in Uxbridge, and he has dropped off a letter, and it's in the town administrator's office if anybody wishes to read. And other than that, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
3-0.